I never booked the tour. That's what I told the woman when she called me out of nowhere. It was late, past 10 p.m., when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something about the number flashing on the screen, all zeros, made me pick up. Your private reservation for Franklin Castle has been confirmed, she said, her voice calm, like this was the most normal thing in the world. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. I laughed, confused. I think you've got the wrong person. I didn't book anything. There was a pause, not the kind where someone's checking their notes, but the kind where they're waiting for you to understand something you can't yet. You didn't choose the castle, she said softly. It chose you. Before I could ask what the hell that meant, the call ended. I stared at my phone for a while, wondering if it was some weird prank or marketing stunt. I wasn't into ghost tours or haunted house nonsense, and I definitely hadn't signed up for anything. But that night, I couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about those words. It chose you. By morning, curiosity had gotten the better of me. Or maybe it was something else entirely, because I found myself driving toward Cleveland without really deciding to. Like I was on autopilot. When I pulled up to Franklin Castle, I felt it immediately. That weight people talk about when they describe places that are wrong. It wasn't just old architecture and creepy windows. The house felt like it was watching me, like it had been waiting. There were 5 of us gathered at the entrance. No one spoke. No introductions, no nervous tourist chatter. It was like we all knew something wasn't right, but didn't want to be the first to say it. Then the guide appeared. He didn't announce himself. He just emerged from the shadows of the doorway, tall and thin, wearing a faded black suit that looked like it belonged in a century-old photograph. His face was pale, expression blank, eyes distant, like he wasn't really seeing us. Without a word, he turned and led us inside. The tour started like you'd expect. Stories of secret passages, tragic deaths, cold spots, all the usual haunted house cliches. But his voice never changed. It was flat, mechanical, like he was reading from a script etched into his bones. About 20 minutes in, things shifted. We stopped in front of a cracked mirror in a narrow hallway, and he said, "Some visitors claim this mirror shows them moments from their past, like the boy who shattered his mother's mirror on Maple Drive in 2001. My heart skipped a beat. That was me. I was 8 years old when I broke that mirror in our hallway. No one else would know that. It wasn't something I ever talked about. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was coincidence. But as we moved through the rooms, more details surfaced, each one cutting deeper. In a dusty study, I saw a baseball glove sitting on a shelf, the exact same model I lost during a family camping trip when I was a teenager. The same faded initials I carved into the leather. Then there was a photograph on a mantle, a black and white image of a street that looked eerily familiar. When I leaned in, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just similar, it was my childhood street, down to the cracked sidewalk in front of our old house. The guide's monotone voice droned on, but I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of how this place knew so much about me. I fell to the back of the group, eyes darting to every door and window. I tried the handle of a side door when no one was looking, locked. The windows wouldn't budge. It felt like the house had sealed itself shut the moment I stepped inside. I glanced at the other guests, hoping to see the same panic building in me, but they just stared blankly ahead, following the guide like puppets on strings. That's when I realized this wasn't a tour. It was a procession, and I was being led somewhere I wasn't supposed to come back from. When the guide turned a corner, I slipped away down a side corridor I hadn't noticed before. The air grew colder with every step, the walls narrowing like they were pushing me forward. I found a door and shoved it open, desperate for an exit. Instead, I found stairs descending into darkness. Something told me to turn back, but my legs kept moving. Each step felt heavier, like I was sinking into something I couldn't escape. The basement wasn't just a basement. It was elsewhere. The air was thick, suffocating. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. I heard whispers, not words, but feelings. Regret, fear, surrender. I can't tell you what happened down there. I couldn't if I wanted to. Whatever controls this place made sure of that. All I know is when I came back upstairs, I wasn't a guest anymore. I was wearing the guide's uniform. The old guide was gone. I didn't know where. I didn't ask. I already understood. They made me sign papers, contracts, NDAs, things written in ink that seemed to shimmer if I looked at it too long. It wasn't legal in the way normal people think. It was binding in ways I still don't fully grasp. Now, I walk the halls like the others before me, giving tours to those the castle calls. Most nights, it's routine, but sometimes we get a name, a person chosen for more than just a scare. And when that happens, we guide them somewhere deeper. If you're reading this, it means I slipped this note into your pocket when you weren't paying attention. Maybe when we brushed past each other in the hall. Maybe when I handed you that brochure. I'm sorry, truly, but once the castle picks you, there's nothing anyone can do. That was the note I found folded into my jacket. At first, I thought it was part of the act, some immersive scare tactic. But as I read it, I realized something was wrong. The group I'd been with was gone. The guide wasn't speaking anymore. He was just staring at me, waiting. I told him I needed the bathroom. I don't know why he let me go. Maybe he knew it didn't matter. Now I'm in here, door locked, sitting on the cold tile floor, typing this on my phone because I don't know what else to do. I thought about calling for help, but I have no signal, just static where my service should be. I tried the window. It doesn't open. Outside, there's nothing but darkness. No street, no sky, just black, like the world ends at these walls. I can hear footsteps outside the door. Slow, deliberate. They're not trying to break in. They're waiting for me to accept it. The note said the castle doesn't let go. I don't know if anyone will ever see this message, but I have to try. If I hit send, maybe. There it is again. The knocking. Soft. Patient. I don't know what happens next. If you're reading this, if you ever get a call inviting you to Franklin Castle, don't answer. It's strange how something as small and meaningless as a wave can ruin your life. Or maybe it wasn't meaningless at all. The day this started wasn't special. I wasn't in any kind of trouble. I wasn't running from anything. I was just bored. I was in Cincinnati for a work trip, killing time before a meeting. The hotel receptionist suggested I check out Eden Park, said it was a nice place to walk around and clear my head. I wasn't really in the mood, but I figured fresh air wouldn't hurt. It was late afternoon when I wandered into the park, following the winding paths without thinking much about where I was going. That's when I saw it, the spring house gazebo. I'd never seen it before, but something about it felt familiar. The pale, domed structure sitting quietly by the pond, framed by trees and the fading light. It was beautiful, in a distant, almost eerie way, like it didn't quite belong to the world around it. Then I noticed him, a man standing dead center beneath the gazebo, perfectly still. I wouldn't have paid much attention if it weren't for the fact that he was staring directly at me. Not in that passing glance kind of way, but locked in, like he'd been waiting for me. I slowed down, a chill creeping up my spine despite the warm spring air. Then he raised his hand and waved. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't playful. It was slow, mechanical, like a gesture he'd repeated too many times. I looked over my shoulder, thinking maybe he was signaling someone behind me. The path was empty. It was aimed at me. I hesitated, feeling that awkward pressure, the kind that makes you smile or nod at strangers just to avoid seeming rude. Against my better judgment, I raised my hand and gave a small wave back. The second I did, he dropped his arm, turned, and walked behind the gazebo, disappearing from sight. I stood there for a few moments, waiting to see if he'd come back out the other side. He didn't. I shook it off, telling myself it was just some weirdo being weird. Cities are full of them. I had no idea that was the last normal moment of my life. When I got back to my car, the first thing I noticed was my phone. It was already unlocked, but everything was wrong. My wallpaper was gone. No notifications. No recent calls or messages. The screen looked like it had been factory reset, but I knew I hadn't touched it. Annoyed, I tried calling my girlfriend. That's when I realized my contacts were completely wiped. No numbers, no texts, no photos, like I'd never used the phone before. I told myself it was a glitch. Phones mess up sometimes. It wasn't until I got back to my hotel that I felt the first real spike of panic. My keycard didn't work. The front desk clerk smiled politely when I explained, but when she asked for my name and checked her system, her smile faded. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a reservation under that name." "That's impossible," I said, pulling out my ID. "I've been staying here for 2 nights already." She glanced at my license, her brow furrowing like something about it didn't sit right. "I'm sorry," she repeated, a little colder this time. "You'll have to leave." I stood outside the hotel in a daze, staring at my reflection in the glass doors, trying to piece together how a tech issue could turn into whatever this was. It got worse from there. When I tried calling coworkers, No one recognized my voice. Emails I sent bounced back. My company login didn't exist anymore. My bank app wouldn't open, said my credentials were invalid. I went to an ATM, but my debit card was declined. Same with my credit cards. By the time I made it back to my apartment 2 days later, my hands were shaking. But it wasn't my apartment anymore. The key didn't fit. A woman I'd never seen before answered the door and told me I had the wrong place. When I argued, she threatened to call the cops. I backed away, feeling like the ground beneath me was starting to crack open. I tried my parents next. I knew my dad's number by heart. It rang, but when he answered, it wasn't his voice, or at least, not the way I remembered it. Older, colder. "Who is this?" he asked. "Dad, it's me," I said, my voice cracking. Sorry, wrong number," he cut in, hanging up. I must have stood on that sidewalk for an hour, staring at nothing, feeling myself unravel. I wasn't just being forgotten. It was like I'd been erased. No one knew me. Not friends, not family, not coworkers. My apartment wasn't mine. My money didn't exist. My digital footprint, photos, accounts, messages, gone without a trace. And through all of it, one image kept burning in my mind. That man under the gazebo. The wave. At first, I told myself it was stupid. There was no connection. But deep down, I knew that moment was the pivot point. Everything had changed the second I lifted my hand. So I went back. I don't even remember driving to Eden Park. I just remember standing at the edge of the pond, staring at the gazebo as the sun began to set. And there she was. A woman this time. Early 30s, in a business suit, standing exactly where the man had been. Frozen in place, staring at a young guy walking along the path. I watched from behind a tree, heart pounding in my ears. She raised her hand and waved. The guy hesitated, just like I had. Then, awkwardly, he waved back. She lowered her arm, turned, and disappeared behind the gazebo. I didn't know whether to feel sick or relieved. It was confirmation, but it was also a sentence. This wasn't random. It was a cycle. A ritual I hadn't even realized I was part of until it was too late. I waited until the park emptied out. I sat there in the dark, staring at that empty gazebo, wondering what would happen if I just refused to play along. But the next morning, I woke up, if you can call it that, standing under the dome. I didn't remember walking there. I didn't remember sleeping. I was just there. Hours passed. I didn't feel hunger or thirst. I didn't feel tired. I just stood, waiting for someone to notice me. It's been days now. I've seen dozens of people walk by. Couples, joggers, tourists with cameras. But none of them look at me. It's like I don't exist unless the right person comes along. And when they do, I'll know. I'll feel it. I thought I'd resist, that I'd find another way out. But the longer I stand here, the more I understand. This is survival. That man who waved at me, he wasn't being malicious. He was doing what he had to do. Just like the woman after him. Just like I will. It's not about wanting to. It's about not disappearing completely. I don't know what happens if no one waves back. Maybe you fade away entirely. Maybe that's worse than this. All I know is that when the moment comes, when someone meets my gaze and hesitates, I'll raise my hand. And I'll pray they wave back. Because once you do, it's no longer your problem. It's theirs. They say the ridges messes with your head. That the old asylum at Ohio University isn't just haunted, it's alive in a way no one really understands. I used to think that was just campus folklore. Every college has its ghost stories, right? A place where drunk students dare each other to sneak in after dark, hoping for a cheap scare. But now I'm not sure if I was ever a student at all. It started like every dumb idea does, late at night, bored, and trying to impress people you think are your friends. I remember standing outside the crumbling facade of the ridges with someone. I know I wasn't alone. There were others with me, laughing nervously, passing around a flashlight. But when I try to picture their faces now, it's like staring through fogged glass. I know they were there. I can still hear the echoes of our footsteps, but the details are gone. We slipped through a broken window on the west side, into what used to be a patient wing. The air inside was heavy, stale, like the building hadn't breathed in decades. Graffiti covered the peeling walls, and the floorboards creaked like they were warning us to turn back. At first, it was exactly what we expected, creepy but harmless. We whispered jokes about ghosts, took photos in the dark, dared each other to walk into empty rooms alone. The usual. Then we heard it. A faint knocking. We all froze. It wasn't wind, or pipes, or some animal scratching around. It was deliberate, steady, like someone tapping gently from the other side of a wall. Someone, I think it was me, called out, "Hello?" The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, we stood there in silence, waiting. Then it started again, 3 knocks, evenly spaced. A pause. Then 2 more. It was coming from a section of the hallway where the wall looked wrong, like it had been patched up hastily years ago. The bricks didn't match, and the plaster was cracked and uneven. That's when the panic set in. What if someone was actually trapped back there? A squatter? Another group of idiots like us who'd gotten stuck? We didn't think. We just acted. We found a rusted piece of metal and started chipping away at the weak spot. The wall crumbled easier than it should have, like it wanted to open. Behind it, there wasn't a hidden room like we expected, just a narrow corridor, stretching into darkness, lit faintly by a flickering bulb overhead. It didn't make sense. That hallway hadn't been there when we walked in. But curiosity beat fear. It always does. We stepped through. The second we crossed that threshold, something shifted. I didn't notice it right away. It was subtle, like the feeling you get when you forget why you walked into a room. But the deeper we went, the heavier it became. The corridor twisted and branched in ways that didn't match the building's layout. Doors appeared where there shouldn't be any. Windows showed nothing but blackness outside. After a while, I realized I couldn't remember how many of us had come in. I asked the person walking beside me, "Where's Mark?" They stared at me blankly. "Who's Mark?" I laughed it off, thinking they were messing with me. But as we kept moving, more things slipped away. I couldn't remember who had suggested coming here tonight, or whose flashlight we were using. I couldn't even recall the last names of the people I was with, people I'd known for years, or so I thought. That's when the argument started. "You weren't here when we came in." "What are you talking about?" "I've been with you the whole time." "No, there were only 3 of us." "No, 4. "Wait, weren't there 5? Every time we tried to count ourselves, we got different answers." Faces blurred. Voices sounded unfamiliar. I started feeling like I was surrounded by strangers, and worse, I could tell they were thinking the same thing about me. We tried retracing our steps, but the halls had changed. Doors led to dead ends. Stairs looped back to the same hallway we started in. The flickering lights overhead hummed louder, like they were laughing at us. At some point, I realized I was alone. I don't remember when the others disappeared, or if they were ever real to begin with. I wandered for what felt like hours, maybe days. Time didn't work the same in there. Hunger faded. Thirst didn't matter. All that was left was the creeping emptiness in my mind, eating away at everything I thought I knew. Then I heard it again, the knocking. It was coming from behind a wall to my left, soft, steady, patient. I pressed my ear against the cold surface, heart pounding. On the other side, I heard voices, familiar ones, laughing, whispering, daring each other to go deeper. And that's when it hit me. The knocking wasn't a warning. It wasn't someone trapped calling for help. It was us. It was me. Echoes of when we first arrived, still stuck in a loop I hadn't even realized I was part of. The Ridges doesn't haunt people. It takes them. And once you're inside, it starts peeling away who you are memory by memory until you're just part of it. A shadow in the halls. A sound behind the walls. I don't know how I got out. I woke up on the grass outside the building as the sun was rising, clothes covered in dust and plaster. No one else was around. No messages on my phone. No one asking where I'd been. When I tried to tell people what happened, they looked at me like I was crazy. My roommate swears I never left that night. Says he saw me in bed the whole time. But I know better. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I hear faint knocking from my closet or behind my bedroom wall. Always the same rhythm. Always waiting. I don't remember who I was before that night. I don't remember who my friends were, or if I ever had any. All I know is that part of me is still in there. And if you ever hear knocking when you visit the Ridges, don't answer. Because once you do, you'll forget why you came. Then you'll forget who you are. And eventually, you'll forget you ever left. I've never been much of a theater guy. I didn't do drama in school, never cared about Broadway shows, and I couldn't tell you the difference between a monologue and a soliloquy if my life depended on it. So when my friends suggested we take a backstage tour of the Majestic Theater while we were passing through Chillicothe, I almost said no. But it was raining, we were killing time, and they promised it'd be worth it for the ghost stories alone. The Majestic's been around since the mid-1800s, and like any old building, it's got its fair share of dark history, rumors of hauntings, mysterious deaths, that kind of thing. I figured at worst, I'd get a few creepy photos for social media. The tour was what you'd expect, a board guide rattling off stories about the theater's past, showing us dusty dressing rooms and creaky balconies. I wasn't really paying attention until we reached the backstage area. While everyone else was focused on some story about a haunted spotlight, I wandered off toward a small office tucked behind a faded curtain. The door was half open, and curiosity got the better of me. Inside, it looked like no one had touched the place in decades. Papers were scattered across a warped wooden desk, shelves lined with old scripts and programs. I ran my fingers along a stack of yellowed playbills, most too faded to read. But one caught my eye. It was in near-perfect condition, despite being dated April 7th, 1946. The title of the play was unfamiliar, The Final Act. Classic, I thought. Sounded like every cheesy production ever made. Then I saw the cast list. There, at the top, printed in bold letters. Lead roll, my full name. I froze. It wasn't just my first name or a common surname. It was my exact full name, middle initial and everything. The kind of coincidence that shouldn't exist. At first, I laughed it off, telling myself it was some gimmick. Maybe the theater printed custom playbills as part of the tour, and I'd stumbled onto mine early. But when I flipped through the rest of the stack, every other playbill listed different names, none of them familiar. And the date, 1946. It didn't make sense. Before I could think too much about it, I heard the guide calling for everyone to regroup. I slipped the playbill into my jacket. Part of me wanted proof of how weird it was. The other part just didn't want to explain why I'd been snooping. I didn't mention it to my friends. I figured the story would sound better after a few drinks. But that night, things started to get strange. When I got back to the motel, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message, it was just a whisper. Opening night is coming. Be ready. I laughed it off as a prank. Maybe the theater had a way of messing with tourists who took souvenirs. But then the calls kept coming. Always from different numbers. Always the same message. The next day, I noticed other things. People around me started acting off. Conversations felt rehearsed, like everyone was reading from a script they barely understood. I'd ask a question, and the responses would be weirdly formal, almost like stage dialogue. Even stranger, certain phrases kept repeating, random people telling me to hit my mark or stay in character. At first, I thought I was just freaking myself out, letting the theater get into my head. But it didn't stop. When I tried driving home, I realized every road led me back to town. No GPS, no signal, just endless loops until I found myself parked outside the Majestic again. The worst part was when I looked at my reflection in a storefront window and saw something pinned to my jacket, a small, white numbered tag, like the kind actors wear backstage before a show. I ripped it off, but a few hours later, it was back. Days blurred together. I stopped sleeping. Every morning, I'd wake up with that playbill sitting neatly on the nightstand, no matter where I hid it or how many times I threw it away. And every time I read it, the date at the top changed. It was counting down. April 7th, 1946 became April 6th, then April 5th. I tried leaving town again, but every attempt ended the same, streets folding back toward the theater, people watching me with vacant smiles like an audience waiting for the show to start. On what should have been April 4th, I woke up in a dressing room. I don't remember how I got there. The mirror in front of me was lined with flickering bulbs. A neatly pressed costume hung beside the door, one that fit me perfectly. The playbill was waiting on the vanity, the date now reading. Opening night, tonight. I could hear murmurs beyond the walls. Footsteps. The distant creak of old seats as an unseen crowd settled in. When I stepped out into the hallway, no one stopped me. I followed the dim lights toward the stage, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The curtain was closed, but I could see a faint glow from the other side. A single spotlight waiting for me. I wanted to run, but my body moved on its own, like I was following stage directions I'd never learned but somehow knew by heart. The curtain rose. I stepped into the light, blinded by it, but I could feel the weight of countless eyes watching me. The theater was full, but I couldn't see a single face. And then I spoke. The words weren't mine. They just came out, a monologue I didn't recognize but delivered perfectly, like I'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. As I spoke, flashes of memory hit me, but they weren't my memories. They were scenes from lives I'd never lived, tragedies I'd never experienced. Yet somehow, they felt familiar. When the final line left my mouth, the spotlight dimmed. The audience erupted into silent applause. I couldn't hear it, but I could see the motion. The curtain fell. I woke up the next morning back in the dressing room, the playbill resting on my chest. The date had reset. It's always opening night now. Every day, I repeat the same steps: the dressing room, the stage, the performance. I don't fight it anymore. There's no point. I understand now. The Majestic Theater doesn't need an audience. It needs a cast. And once your name appears on that playbill, you're part of the show forever. So if you ever visit Chillicothe and take the backstage tour, if you find a dusty old program with your name printed on it, do yourself a favor. Don't wait for opening night. Because once the curtain rises, it never falls for good. If you're ever desperate enough to rent a room in a place like the Collingwood Arts Center, don't answer the tapping. I didn't know that when I moved in. About a month earlier, I packed up what little I owned in Michigan and headed south into Ohio. Toledo wasn't exactly my dream destination, but when you're broke and need a roof over your head, dreams don't factor in much. I found a listing online, a studio apartment in an old art center for artists, dirt cheap, utilities included. It sounded perfect. The Collingwood Arts Center looked exactly like you'd expect, a massive, aging brick building with too many windows and a strange stillness hanging over it. People told me it used to be a convent, then part of a college, now some kind of hybrid between an arts hub and low-income housing. It didn't bother me. I wasn't planning to stay long. The first few days were uneventful, just me settling into a room that smelled like old wood and dust no matter how much I cleaned. I met a few other tenants, quiet, artsy types who kept to themselves. No one was unfriendly, but there was this edge to everyone, like they were distracted by something they weren't talking about. I noticed it my third night there. Around 1 a.m., just as I was drifting off, I heard it, a faint tapping. I sat up, listening. It wasn't random creaks or the hum of old plumbing. It was sharp, spaced out, like someone tapping on metal. I pressed my ear to the wall where the vent was. 3 short taps. A pause. 2 taps. Another pause. Then it stopped. The next morning, I mentioned it to a guy I'd met in the hallway, Derek, a painter who lived 2 doors down. He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Old building," he said. "You'll hear things. It's just the pipes." But I noticed how quickly he ended the conversation after that. Over the next week, the tapping became a nightly routine. Always late, always the same short bursts, deliberate pauses. It wasn't just noise. I could feel it in my gut. Someone was sending a message. I tried to brush it off, but on the 6th night, I gave in. I grabbed my phone and started recording the sequences. A little Googling confirmed what I was starting to suspect. It was Morse code. I spent hours translating it, thinking I'd uncover some weird joke or meaningless phrase. But when I finished, my stomach dropped. The message was simple: hello. I didn't know what to do with that. Was it someone playing around? A strange tradition? I told myself it was probably just a bored neighbor. But the next night, it came again. "Your turn." I stared at the vent for what felt like an hour, my heart racing. I should have ignored it. I should have gone to bed, packed up the next day, and gotten out of there. Instead, I found myself tapping back, clumsily spelling out, "Who?" The response was immediate. "Welcome." That was when everything changed. From that night on, the messages didn't stop. Every evening, sometime after midnight, I'd hear the tapping. Sometimes short words: "Listen, stay awake." But soon, they got personal. Blue shirt. I was wearing one. Left at 3:12. That was exactly when I'd run to the store. I started keeping my blinds shut. I checked my locks 5 times a night. I barely slept. The worst part was knowing whoever this was, they weren't guessing. They could see me, or hear me, or both. I went back to Derek, cornered him in the hallway. I didn't even ask politely this time. "You know about the tapping. What the hell is it?" His face went pale. He glanced around before leaning in. "You answered." I nodded. He exhaled sharply, like he already knew how this would end. "You shouldn't have." That was all he said before he walked off. 2 days later, his room was empty. I knocked, asked around, but no one claimed to know where he'd gone. The landlord told me people came and went all the time in a place like this. But Derek hadn't packed a thing. I started noticing things after that. Other tenants tapping in their rooms late at night, subtle, nervous patterns. Some looked hollow-eyed, terrified. Others looked resigned. One woman from across the hall, I think her name was Claire, slipped a note under my door. It only said, "Play along." By then, I didn't have a choice. The messages were getting longer, more demanding. "Ready. Follow the rules. Fail equals gone." I didn't know what the rules were. No one would tell me. Every night felt like a test I didn't understand. If I didn't respond fast enough, I'd hear footsteps outside my door. Once, I woke up to find my doorknob turned all the way to the left, like someone had been trying to open it from the outside. I called the police once, told them someone was harassing me. They showed up, looked around, found nothing. After they left, I got a new message tapped out so aggressively it rattled the vent cover. No police. That's when I realized this wasn't just a game between a couple of bored tenants. It was bigger, organized. I started seeing things I'd missed before, blacked-out vans parked outside for days, men I'd never seen entering the building late at night, rooms with no names on the doors, but sounds coming from inside. It wasn't just residents playing some sick joke. I was convinced this was something darker, a criminal operation hiding behind the facade of a crumbling art center, a place where no one asked questions, and people could vanish without anyone noticing. Claire disappeared next. Then the guy from the basement I barely knew. Each time someone vanished, I'd hear more frantic tapping from different parts of the building, like the survivors were warning each other or saying goodbye. A week ago, I got a message that made my blood run cold. Final round. Midnight. Door. That was it. I haven't left my room since. I've pushed my dresser against the door, turned off every light. It's 11:54 p.m. now. I'm sitting here in the dark, watching the clock, waiting for whatever happens when the minute hand strikes 12. I don't know if this is a test or if they're coming to finish it. But here's the worst part. Just now, the tapping started again. Not from the vent this time. It's coming from inside the room. I've always thought local legends were just that, stories people tell to scare tourists or keep kids from wandering too far. So when I decided to take a solo trip to Hocking Hills State Park in Ohio, I didn't think twice about the warnings. The guy at the gas station near Logan was the first to say it. Make sure you're out before sunset, he told me as I paid for a bottle of water. When I asked why, he just shrugged. Just don't want to see you get lost. People don't come back sometimes. I brushed it off. I'd hiked alone plenty of times. I wasn't some amateur who'd wander off a trail and end up on the news. But he wasn't the last to say it. When I checked into the little cabin I rented, the woman at the front desk told me the same thing. Out of the park before dark, especially near Old Man's Cave. She said it like it was a rule, not advice. By the third warning, I'll admit, I was curious. I looked it up that night. Most of what I found was typical ghost story stuff, tales about Richard Rowe, the so-called old man who lived and died in the cave back in the 1800s. Some people claimed to see his spirit wandering the trails. Others talked about strange disappearances over the years. Nothing I hadn't heard before in every other haunted place. I wasn't there for ghost stories. I just wanted a quiet hike, clear my head, and get some good photos. The next afternoon, I set out a little later than planned. I didn't think it mattered. I had a map, a phone with full battery, and the weather was perfect. The trails around Old Man's Cave were beautiful, even more than I expected. The sandstone cliffs, waterfalls, the dense forest, it felt like stepping into another world. I guess that should have been my first hint. I got carried away taking pictures and exploring some of the side trails. I wasn't worried when the sun started dipping lower. I figured I had plenty of time to get back. But in Hocking Hills, sunset comes fast. The trees are so thick, it's like someone flipping a switch. One minute you're walking in golden light, and the next, everything's gray and shadowed. By the time I realized how dark it had gotten, I was already off the main path. I turned around, expecting to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. The trail markers I'd been following were gone. I told myself to stay calm, but every direction I walked in felt wrong, like the park had quietly shifted while I wasn't paying attention. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I stopped and listened, but the sound stopped too. I called out, nothing. Just the wind moving through the trees. I kept walking, a little faster now, telling myself it was just other hikers heading back late like me. But after a few minutes, I heard them again. Closer this time. Soft, steady steps, like someone wasn't in a hurry at all. I spun around, and that's when I saw him. A man, maybe 30 feet back, standing completely still in the middle of the trail. I couldn't make out his face in the fading light, but something about the way he stood there, rigid, head slightly tilted, made my skin crawl. I raised a hand, trying to play it cool. Hey, you know which way the main trail is? He didn't move. I took a step toward him, but as I did, I heard movement behind me. I turned and froze. Another figure, closer than the first. This one was a woman, I think long hair, pale face, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress. She was just standing there, same as the man, watching me without a word. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. I wasn't alone out here, and I didn't think these people were lost hikers. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on both of them as best I could. But as I moved, more figures began to appear between the trees. Silent, motionless, dressed in clothes that didn't belong to this decade or even the last one. Dozens of them, scattered along the trail and woods, all facing me. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I sprinted through those woods. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I'd catch glimpses of them, never running, never chasing, just appearing, closer and closer. The trails didn't make sense anymore. No matter which way I turned, I'd end up back at the same rock formation, the same fallen tree. It was like the park was folding in on itself. I stumbled into a small clearing, gasping for breath, and that's when I saw him. Me. Standing across the clearing was a figure that stopped me cold. Same jacket, same backpack, same face. It was like looking in a mirror, except the version of me standing there was blank, empty-eyed, just like the others. I couldn't move. My mind was racing, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I looked down and noticed something that made my stomach drop. My footprints, the ones I'd been leaving in the soft dirt, they were gone. Behind me, the trail was untouched, like I hadn't been walking there at all. I don't remember hitting the ground. The fear just swallowed me whole, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, it was morning. The sun was shining through the trees, birds chirping like nothing had happened. I was lying on the edge of a familiar trail, one I recognized from the map. My backpack was still on, my phone still in my pocket. For a minute, I just lay there, too scared to move. Then I realized I was alive. I laughed, a shaky, disbelieving sound, and forced myself to stand up. I made it back to my car by noon. Drove straight out of Logan without looking back. I've told myself 100 times it was a nightmare. That I got lost, panicked, maybe hit my head and imagined the rest. That's what I believe most days. But sometimes, when I'm walking alone, I get this feeling. Like someone's watching me. Like I'm not entirely here anymore. And every now and then, when I catch my reflection in a window or a mirror, I hesitate. Because for just a split second, I wonder if the version looking back at me is really me. Or if I never actually left those woods at all.